Nexus Bitcoin Frontiers series on the origin of money and Bitcoin. Lecture 4, well, lecture and discussion, roundtable discussion. Number 4, the digital collectibles. So today we're talking about these intermediate ideas that appeared on the Cypherpunk mailing list, intermediate between Chaumian eCash and Bitcoin, and they're called the digital collectibles. They were an idea for trying to make a digital currency that has no central issuer. So a distributed system that acts as money, can be used as money. They didn't quite get it right. They didn't quite come up with anything feasible, but it was an important step toward Bitcoin. So there were three of these proposals. There was B-money. Here, come here, sit down, join our discussion. There was, oh, yeah, you didn't want to, I guess. There was B-money, which came out in 1997. Reusable, well, B-money, Wei Dai came up with that. Reusable proof of work, which was done by Hal Finney. And this was the only proposal that actually was built and functioned. And finally, BitGold by Nick Szabo.
And your co-host just showed up.
Yeah. Yes, you're late. So I'm going to talk about reusable proof of work first. That's kind of the simplest one, even though it came out in the middle. It's logically the first one we want to talk about. It's simpler, and because Hal Finney wanted to actually build it as a prototype. So the idea of all of these was to create a digital version of collectibles, which is Nick Szabo's ideas about proto-monies. We call them collectibles, and we talked about that in discussion number 2. So just to review, the idea of a collectible is it is a scarce good that can be used as money, and the thing that makes it scarce is the work required to create it. So we can have collectibles that are not made out of valuable materials. They can be made out of find all over the place. But if they are fashioned by human hands, one by one, into a form that can be used as money. Hey, dogs, we're trying to talk here. Oh, man, somebody's angry.
Somebody's jealous.
Okay. So, that's. Oh, man. What was I saying? Yeah, so people used to use all kinds of different things as money. You can use beads as money. And this only works when you've got a low level of industrialization, right? Because if you can mass produce the beads, you can mass produce them, then they can't be used as money because they're not scarce anymore. So you need to live in a society where there isn't a lot of capitalism, by which you mean you can't produce factories, not a lot of higher order goods, you can't capitalize industry very much. Then you can have a form of money that's just based on, that's scarce because of the human labor required to create it, even if the material that makes it up isn't that scarce. By contrast, think of something like gold. Gold takes a lot of work to produce, but it's scarce because there's a limited amount of the material in the earth. There's only so much, probably a lot more than what we mined so far, but it's difficult to get at. So when you make a digital collectible, the idea is that you can prove that computational work went into the creation of a message that can be sent over the internet, and these messages can be used like money. The breakthrough that made this possible was Adam Back's idea of the cost function. And it's really basically just a hash function that is partially inverted. So you don't have to invert the whole hash. You just which has a hash that satisfies a certain property. So the first digits of the hash are all zeros. If you're doing binary digits, each of these reduces the probability of finding it by 1/2. Of course, we use this in Bitcoin. The higher the difficulty, the more leading zeros the hash of the block is required to have. Now, the problem with using these things as money is the double. You can, once you have a message, you can copy it as much as you want, and nobody is the wiser. It's very difficult to establish that a message is owned by one particular person. So the idea of the digital collectibles is that you would have a number of servers that are supposed to keep track of ownership, and people can query the servers to determine who owns what and if somebody has enough to pay them for something. Reusable proof of work by Helpany did not do that. It was a centralized system. It was a prototype, so he didn't bother trying to make it into a distributed system. And the way it worked was very simple. You would send the server your proof of work, and it would credit you with an amount that is proportional to the work shown. And then you can transfer this, and as well as it credits your public key. That's how it establishes who owns what. So you can send a signed message transferring some of it to somebody else, and then it changes the value from one person to another. So the reusable proof of work never became financially important. People didn't invest in it, didn't become the internet's money, and the reason for it is Moore's law, or at least that's what I would attribute the problem to be. So if computing power gets twice as powerful, that means that your proof of work becomes half as valuable every couple of years. The same amount of computer work becomes cheaper and cheaper and cheaper. So if you're trying to make a currency that is created by doing proof of work, you're essentially creating something that's like holding a rapidly inflating commodity or currency. And there isn't a lot of available information on the history of reusable proof of work, but my understanding of economics leads me to presume that is a reason that would prevent any of these things from working. People wouldn't want to hold it. It can't be used as a medium of exchange if there's no reason to hold it, right? Does that make sense to everybody? It's like you're holding an inflating. Right. We're trying to create the internet's money, and we're creating something that hyperinflates faster than most fiat currencies, right? Yeah, it's worse than fry coin. Yeah, so both B money and BitGold try to get around this problem by changing the amounts of the currency that you create at different times. So effectively, they're pegging the value of their currency at the time it's created to something. It could be dollars or some basket of commodities. One of the proposals mentioned some basket of commodities. I don't remember which one. I think it might be money. But then you've got another problem. Then the currency isn't fungible because you create some of it in 2000 and you create some more in 2001, but the amounts created are based on the value of some commodities at that time, and there really isn't any reason why anybody would value these two amounts according to that history. So, I create 100 units of B money in 2000, and I create 100 in 2001. There's no reason that these should have an equal value to one another on the open market. They're really completely different things. And once you try to adjust the cost function to to something in the economy, some basket of goods or whatever, you've really kind of abandoned the whole idea of a collectible at that point, I would say. You end up with something where the thing is no longer scarce because of the work required to create it. It's just scarce because of some arbitrary rule that the distributed system imposes. The fallacy here is the sunk costs fallacy. So say a meteor crashes into Earth and it's made entirely out of gold and it has more gold in it than has ever been mined in the history of the Earth. You suddenly have this giant blob of gold, way more than the whole rest of the Earth has combined. And clearly, the value of all gold has to go down. It's not like only gold mined at one point will go down in value. All the gold has to go down. And that's because we value things based on their future uses. And if all the gold is basically the same, it all has to go down. And it's the same thing when we're talking about a digital collectible, anything that requires work to create. If the amount of work required to create it goes down, then all of it has to go down in value, regardless of when it was created. So both B-Money and BitGold have these arbitrary proposals for creating units at different times based on the value of a basket of goods or based on some other schema. But there's no guarantee of fungibility at that point. You're creating totally different things at each point in time. So those are the two main problems with the digital collectibles. Either you have a hyperinflating currency or you have currency units that aren't fungible. Well, I guess I should explain what that word means, since people who know about currencies know what it means, but it's not used under any other context. But fungible just means that two units are interchangeable, and there isn't any reason to value any one more than the other. So you have 2 ounces of gold, two gold coins. They're both an ounce, and so they're both the same thing as far as you're concerned. That's fungibility. There are a few other weird things in the digital collectibles. So, and in particular, there's a proposal in the appendix to B-Money where Wei Dai proposes to limit the money supply and essentially impose a monetary policy on B-Money. This is kind of a weird idea, but it actually won't work. And the reason is you can't actually limit the supply of any of these things. If there is value in proof of work, I would say that there is some value in being able to prove that you did work, right? If there's value in it, then any 2 units of it will be fungible, regardless of whether they are recognized by the V-Money system or not. In other words, a digital collectible doesn't have a brand. This is in contrast to Bitcoin, because Bitcoin, it's really the brand that makes it work, and Bitcoin is not interchangeable with Litecoin or something. But if we created, we have this B-Money system and they're imposing a money on B-Money, we create an alternate one that has a different policy. The units ought to be interchangeable insofar as they are the same thing. They're both units that are created at the same time. The B-Money system doesn't have the ability to impose a monetary policy on B-Money, and there isn't a way to limit the money supply.
So I have a question. Did any of these actually have like stamps and stuff that were backing the currency? Of reusable proof of work.
I don't know what you mean by stamps, but
something that someone on the street would see as a collectible. I collect stamps.
Oh,
I collect
so this is specialized terminology. So we're using the word collectible in the way that Nick Szabo used it in Shelling Out, and his idea about proto-monies, the earliest forms of money, is that he called them collectibles, and they were little things that people created, like beads. That's what wampum was. But this doesn't have anything to do with collecting stamps or anything like that.
And you said that they were correlated to baskets of objects. Who got to decide that?
Neither of these, well, B-Money and BitGold were never implemented. They were only written about, and they were written about quite vaguely. So, so B-Money says to create units based on a basket of goods, but it doesn't say what that will be. They are both of these leave lots of stuff that left to figure out. They're very short papers. They're each about half a page.
Wow.
Proof of work is the only thing that one of these that was actually created, and it does not rely on a basket of goods. It's just the amount, the currency units that you create are proportional to the proof of work shown to the server, and that's it. And as a result, the money supply goes up exponentially, or it would if it was in widespread use. But there's no evidence of any actual commerce taking place using reusable proof of work. I don't know of any. Yeah?
Before, when you were talking about reusable proof of work, you seem to be using a limited quantity to be a synonym for scarce, and that's not quite correct.
Okay, well, if I said something that implies limited quantity equals scarce, that was my mistake. But like, but like a wampum, there isn't a strictly limited quantity. It's just that it's scarce because there's work required to create it, and you can't, we live in a hunter-gatherer society, so we can't capitalize and mass produce it.
I just like, to be clear on that, because scarce is a word that is very commonly misinterpreted.
Yeah,
And it just means that the amount is not infinite.
right, yeah, that's correct, good point.
So, I mean,
How's that?
there can be a very high
Yeah.
supply and
Yeah.
it's still scarce.
Right, so,
Would be scarce.
Air would not be scarce, because I guess the most precise definition would be that the supply exceeds demand at a price of zero.
so like air is scarce if you're a scuba diver. Because you're going into environments where you perform actions to make sure you get air. But if we're just bathed in it and we breathe in and out without even thinking, then that's not scarcity.
So like on the Earth's surface, everybody can breathe as much as they possibly could, with at a price of zero, because they can have as much as they want, but the supply still exceeds the demand. Therefore, air is not scarce. Pretty much anything else is scarce. Like no matter how low the price is for something, if you could consume, if the amount that's available at a price of zero is not more than what everybody could possibly consume, then it is scarce.
So the term you used was scarcity and limited.
Sorry, what term I used for
You
what?
said
Yeah,
scarcity and
limited
limited.
supply.
limited
I said that
supply.
before, that wasn't exactly correct.
Right,
Yeah.
okay, so let me get this straight. So you're talking about wampum, and so the difference between scarcity and limited supply in that circumstance would be that it's limited supply because of the work involved to create the product and not necessarily the materials to create the product.
Yeah, well, so what I did say was that gold is scarce because there actually is a limited supply. There's a certain amount on Earth, and that's it. Whereas beads or wampum, they're scarce because the people who used beads as a currency couldn't mass produce them. Although theoretically, there could have been an unlimited number if they had been able to make a factory and churn them out. And in fact, European colonists destroyed currencies all around the world when they met native peoples who couldn't mass produce things, and they could, so they could destroy their currency. This is what happened to the Yap stones too. They're not exactly a currency, but they're similar. They're giant stones that are huge wheels that people would use to show off how wealthy they are, and you would own these. You can't do anything with them, but you could own them and be wealthy if you had one. So that when the Europeans came, they could produce lots of these things, and they destroyed that. The same thing happened with wampum. Where was I? So the problem with reusable proof of work, it's still scarce because there's work to create it, but it's not scarce enough because we know, or at least we expect based on previous experience, that we'll be able to create an exponentially expanding supply as a result of Moore's law. But if Moore's law stopped working, then reusable proof of work would be fine. If we hit the limit, then we could go with that.
I have to disagree with that.
Okay.
So reusable proof of work was Adam Back, right?
That was Hal Finney.
Oh.
Adam Back invented cost functions at Ashcash.
Like the idea that something is valuable just because work went into producing it, that's also known as the labor theory of value, and it doesn't work.
Yeah.
We know it doesn't work.
Well,
So I would say that the reason, like, that the reusable proof of work is never going to be money. One, because the amount of currency constantly goes up, and secondly, because just because you're doing work doesn't mean that it's valuable.
Yeah, that's correct. So what I should have said is that it is, possibly viable if Moore's law stopped working. I wouldn't say that it's going. I wouldn't be like investing in huge quantities of it if Moore's law stopped working. I would say that it's theoretically possible that it could become money, but not necessarily the case. But yeah, if we actually can strictly limit the supply instead of to just a certain number, that's better than if we limit it by making it difficult to create more of it, because that is kind of wasteful for people to be producing this stuff and spending lots of time on it. We could just have a limited supply. Of course, I don't know how we avoid that. In Bitcoin, we do have a limited supply, strictly limited, but we do spend a lot of establishing the consensus. But that'll be the next discussion.
So like reusable proof of work, you're expending a lot of work, and you still haven't even solved the problem of transaction order. You have to have a centralized decider of which transaction came first.
Yeah, that's correct. And that was one of the major innovations of Bitcoin. So let's just do a preview. But like Bitcoin is fungible, right? And I was arguing that these things not necessarily so. And this is what makes Bitcoin fungible, is the fact that there is a new proof of work with each time you transact it. So when you receive Bitcoin, you don't get something that was created years ago. You just get a new output in the blockchain, and it doesn't matter what the history of Bitcoin was before that point. It's everybody who received Bitcoin gets the same thing, and all of the network has to behave the same way and treat Bitcoins the same way, because they each had to invest to enter the network and become part of it. And once they did that, then they have the incentive to follow the established rules. There isn't anything like that in the digital collectibles. So anyway, that's my introduction to the digital collectibles. They were but didn't. They had some economic fallacies built into them, and
seems like more of a. It was only half a page paper. It seems like more of a. What do you guys think of this idea?
oh yeah, well, so
Something we're talking about 10
so
years later.
sure. Well, but if you're if nobody in the entire world has even the concept that we need an internet distributed system money, and you're the only people talking about it, and you're at least trying to come up with ideas about it, that's still pretty good. But yeah, this was a very small group throwing ideas around, trying to come up with something, and and ideas did actually evolve into Bitcoin, so they're still important, I say, anyway. So questions, discussion, comments? Yeah, you don't have to raise your hand.
Does fungibility come from the same root as fungi or fungi?
I don't think so.
What is that? You don't think so?
Not that I would tend to doubt that, but good.
If anybody has any
Good questions.
I'm interested.
So
But mycelium comes from fungi.
yes,
Of course.
yeah, and the idea of that is there's no center. There are a bunch of spores filling up the whole forest.
Austria.
What?
From Austria.
Ebola.
Well, Ebola to you too.
Ebola for everyone.
Yeah.
Right. It's a self-propagating system.
So how are we gonna work on this meme where the state is going to collapse tomorrow?
Oh, that thing.
I've been telling everyone I know.
Oh, well, that's nice. Well, I mean, I think that we have the fact that we can build buildings now that allow commerce to take place and make it, much easier to avoid oversight. I mean, I think that that's pretty good evidence. So fungibility, fungible, capable of being used in place of another. From medieval Latin,
Thank you.
fungibilis, from Latin fungi, perform, as in fungi vice, to take the place. It doesn't say if it's, I mean, this word fungi, that is just spelled just like fungi, it doesn't say if it's related to,
So that means perform.
yeah.
To perform. I wonder why if fungi like the the mushroom type comes from Latin, I wonder why they named it that.
Fungus. No, it's from Latin fungus and mushroom.
Uh-huh.
Does not have anything to do with perform. Which
Okay.
I wouldn't think so, because mushrooms don't do it.
So back to the reusable proof of work.
Yeah.
Sorry.
We have real world analogies. So are you guys familiar with the Somalian currency after the fall of their government? The story behind that?
No, can you tell us about it?
So this is, as I understand it, which may be totally flawed, but it's very romantic. When the government fell, the central bank stopped operating, and there was no one to prevent people from counterfeiting money. So they did. And they counterfeited basically the highest denomination bill.
Mhm.
And you couldn't really tell the counterfeits from the real ones. But if anyone printed one with another zero at the end, that was obviously a counterfeit because the government never printed one.
Okay.
And so they would print, and then the currency would get inflated until it was worth the paper it was printed on. And so it was no longer profitable to print money. So it would take a stack of bills to buy a little bread. But that was it was a form of trade. And then as time went on, some of these bills would get lost or destroyed, and the currency would gain more value. And suddenly it was now worth printing money. And then people reinflated the currency supply. So it was a self-regulating system to keep the money supply in check.
Oh, yeah. Well, I've heard a similar story from Peter Serga. He didn't connect it with Somalia, but I think what you said is true. There are instances of this happening, of a government collapsing, but their currency is still used for some time for that reason, because it gets to a point where it no longer makes sense to try to counterfeit it anymore. And that is a collectible. That satisfies the definition of a collectible at that point. It begins as fiat money, but when you get to the point where it's scarce because of the difficulty of producing it, then it's a collectible. But I think that there is an economic problem with that sort of thing as compared to something like Bitcoin, which has a fixed supply. And that is that it's much more, there's a much greater reward to people who make correct investments. So if you predict a stock market crash or anything that should make cash more valuable, there's a reward for holding cash if the supply is strictly limited. But if the supply changes in response to the value of the economy, right, then there isn't necessarily an incentive for people to perform the service of holding cash in preparation for a stock market crash, because other people will just create more of the currency, and the value doesn't go up. But the collectible model, that's still better than the centralized inflation model, where one party just prints as much as they want as cheaply as possible, and just gets to scam everybody with it as much as they want, basically.
So Bitcoins are not digital collectibles because they're fungible.
Well, they're not digital collectibles, but the reason they're not collectibles is they're scarce for a different reason than a collectible is. But Bitcoins are scarce basically because there's a brand name. It's kind of the definition, and you have to be invested in the Bitcoin network in order to have any influence over it. And once you're invested, then it's no longer to your advantage to change the rules. Well, it never was, but then it's bad for you to change the rules. So if you buy Bitcoins, you don't want the number to go up. I mean, actually, you would want it to go down. You'd like it if other people were throwing away their Bitcoins, right? Throwing them in the money pit, like in that Onion news program, right? You're probably not going to convince them to do that. But nobody wants the number to go up because they're invested, and that'll reduce their investment. And so somebody tries to make a fork that sends a billion new Bitcoins to themselves, they're not going to follow that fork. They're going to ignore it, and that's what makes Bitcoin scarce. We don't even have a word for that. I guess call it a cryptocurrency, of course. But we can sometimes call other things that are not based on blockchains at all, we call those cryptocurrencies. But yeah. I wish I could have used reusable proof of work when it was running. In fact, I wish I could just scrape the website even. There's so little information available. There's like 2 pages to the original web page that are archived, and there's the original announcement, but most of the web page is lost and all the code is lost, as far as I know. If anybody actually knows where to find more information on it, I would greatly appreciate that.
It's not like we can ask the author.
Yeah, it was really a problem because just pretty much the moment when I started doing research on this and I realized that this stuff needs to be like archived, I'm like, oh, he died. Now what am I gonna do?
Just wait for him to come back.
Yeah, right. He's cryogenically frozen. He'll be fine. Get him back pretty soon.
You can always make inquiry to his personal library or something like that.
Well, I want to contact his widow. He's still alive. So he's just cryogenically frozen, so she's not a widow.
Yeah, it's not.
You can contact her. I've also heard that G. Maxwell might have something. He was apparently involved. Right now there isn't. It's hard to know much about reusable proof of work. This is definitely something that we want to archive on the Institute. Just get a GitHub for the code even. It's crazy. Why didn't he put it on GitHub when it came out? It was like 2004. GitHub existed then, didn't it?
You know, source storage stays.
Yeah. Oh, okay, yeah. But still, he could have done that. Could have done something. All right. If there's nothing else, then I'll conclude the broadcast. Thanks everybody for coming. And next week, Bitcoin, part 1.
Of an 8-part series.
Yeah, no, we're gonna do 2 parts of Bitcoin.